I made a video on WrestleMania The Arcade Game quite a while back, and like most of those old videos, I'm not happy with it today. Midways WrestleMania is one of my favourite wrestling games of all time, if you can even call it a wrestling game, and I don't think I did the game justice with that old video from a how to play standpoint, and I didn't exactly explain why I thought it was so good. I do want to go back to old topics on the channel and tidy things up a little in an effort to make wrestling bios better, and before we get too deep into the SmackDown series, I thought now would be a good time to cover WrestleMania The Arcade Game again because it's been on my mind for quite a long time. I think some people may get a little put off by this game when they see it in action, or they may be tempted to button mash like hell in order to get through a match, but hopefully I can change how you look at the game and give a few pointers on how to beat your opponents, because seriously, once you get the hang of WrestleMania The Arcade Game, it's pretty hard to put down again. I'll be playing the arcade version mostly today, but we'll also take a look at the console ports and the PC port too. Last time it was just a few quick comparisons, but I want to talk today about how those different versions play. One console port in particular that was probably the most popular really didn't do the original game justice, but we'll look at all that very soon. This is WrestleMania The Arcade Game Revisited. Before you jump in and try to play this thing, you're going to need to learn a few basics because WrestleMania The Arcade Game will kick your ass if you don't come prepared. It'll happen so fast too that you'll think you just wasted your money. Shawn Michaels is my main in WrestleMania, so I'm going to show you guys the basics with HBK plus his specials. I'm also going to do a better job than Todd Pettengill.
Presenting to you another great video strategy guide.
First, the button layout. Most are going to emulate this and use a control pad that's handy, or maybe an arcade stick. WrestleMania utilizes 5 main buttons, and here's the button layout from the arcade machine. You'll want your pad or fight stick to match the attack buttons. So for example, if you're using a PlayStation controller, set triangle is power punch, circle will be power kick, X or cross will be your normal kick button, and punch will be set to square. Your block button can be mapped to a shoulder button or any other button on your fight stick. Just make sure it's easily accessible. Right, start up a game, and the first thing you'll notice is the characters look amazing. The wrestlers were digitized for WrestleMania The Arcade Game by the guys at Midway, and this was during the peak of the Mortal Kombat and NBA Jam craze. Both those games were also developed by Midway. Let's go through the basics then. Punch and kick are self-explanatory. Here's HBK's basic punch and HBK's basic kick. Shawn's power punch sees him pull out a baseball bat to crack his opponent, and his power kick is a jumping spinning back kick. WrestleMania The Arcade Game is completely over the top, and the only thing remotely realistic about the game are the digitized characters. The wrestlers can do some insane moves like the Undertaker shooting ghosts at his opponent, or Razor Ramon's arms turning into actual razors, but let's stick with the basics for now. Tapping forward twice with power punch performs a lockup, and tapping away twice with power punch performs an Irish whip. Learn to do these often and get the timing right because you'll open up more moves after performing either the lockup or the Irish whip. When you lock up, you'll need to pull off a move quite quickly or you'll get countered. And during an Irish whip, your opponent will have a recovery meter, so you need to think fast during both states. After an Irish whip, pressing back and power punch performs a hip toss, an arm drag, a snap mare, or a slam, depending on who you choose. Now, the actual moves. This is where people get put off, I guess, but spending 10 minutes to learn a few inputs is gonna go a long way. From a lockup, Shawn can perform a ton of moves. For example, forward punch performs an arm breaker, forward power punch performs a Frankensteiner, and down power kick performs a back suplex. He has more moves from the lockup state, but check these out online and get used to the quick timing of the moves. You also don't need to be locked up to perform other moves. For example, tapping down forward and then the kick button a few times lets HBK perform a string of super kicks, and he can perform his Frankensteiner from a standing position by tapping forward power kick. I can't stress this enough though, learn one character's moves, practice the moves as much as you can with repetition, and you'll have them memorized in no time at all. Tapping punch and kick together lets you run, and then you can perform more moves at the touch of a button. You can climb the top rope and dive off as expected, and you can fight on the outside too, but if you're out there alone, your health meter will start to drain. Your defensive options consist of the block button while standing and performing a button combination when locked up. If HBK gets caught in a lockup, I can perform his Frankensteiner command to get out. There are 2 universal lockup counters for each wrestler that consist of forward power punch and down power kick. So really, a lockup becomes a test to see who can input their button command quickest. Rotate the control stick 720 degrees away from your opponent to get a power up. This lets you deal 4 times the damage if you can attack your opponent within 5 seconds of performing your taunt. And rotating the control stick or D-pad 720 degrees toward your opponent will make your character speed up for around 7 seconds or so. Finally, the combo system. You're going to build up the combo meter as you play a match, and once it's filled up, you can perform a super combo. These are just like Mortal Kombat 3's dial a combo, where the button commands have been predetermined and there's no way to freestyle or customize the combo, but they still do a ton of damage. Most combos start with a forward command, and then you'll need to look up the remaining inputs. They're different for every competitor. You can also use your combo meter to kick out of a pin in the final round if your health reaches 0. Since matches are 2 out of 3 falls, it's sometimes beneficial to hold on to your combo meter if you think there's a chance you'll lose the final round. There's a bit more to it though. Actually, there's a lot more to it, and it's all centered around timing, but this will be more than enough to get you started. WrestleMania The Arcade Game demands patience, and you'll be rewarded for that patience. As a button masher, WrestleMania isn't good, but if you know what you're doing, you're going to have a lot of fun with it. Oh, before I forget, The Undertaker has a fatality. Apparently, other wrestlers were supposed to have finishers too, but they were either taken out at the request of Vince McMahon, as reported online, or there wasn't enough time to get them all included. WrestleMania The Arcade Game delivers on its name. This is an arcade game through and through where your job is to beat a bunch of wrestlers one after the other. Here's the available roster, and yeah, it's quite thin, but mastering every one of these characters will take time. I still haven't done it, to be honest. We have got Doink, Razor Ramon, The Undertaker, Yokozuna, Shawn Michaels, Bam Bigelow, Bret Hart, and Lex Luger. Adam Bomb was motion captured for the game, but he didn't make the cut. Each wrestler has their own stats, so not everyone plays the same from a basic standpoint. Some superstars might be a little faster, whereas other guys will be a little stronger, things like that. After choosing your character, you're going to select which belt you want to go for. The IC title gives you a few singles matches, a few 2-on-1 handicap matches, and finally, you'll have to beat 3 opponents by yourself to win the IC belt. Whereas the WWF title starts you off right away with 2-on-1 matches, followed by more 3-on-1 matches. The final match then for the World Wrestling Federation title is a gauntlet match featuring every superstar in the game. 3 guys in the ring at the same time is chaotic enough, but when there's 4 guys in there, you'll need to try and strategize a little. Focusing all your efforts onto one guy will be your best bet, but that's easier said than done. There's no unlockables in the game. Instead, you get treated to some batshit crazy text endings that are just as insane as the action inside the ring. As mentioned in the old video, Justin Wang uploaded a great video looking at the endings of WrestleMania The Arcade Game, so check that out if you want to see them all. Let's take a look at the home ports. None of the ports are as good as the arcade version, unfortunately, but there are a few decent ones. Sculptured Software handled the home ports of WrestleMania while Acclaim published the games. First, the PS1 port. Start the game up, get to the roster screen, and you'll notice you now have some more options. You can turn off blocking, set the difficulty, alter the clock speed, and change the button layout. Start up a game and you can instantly see that the arcade version looks superior. Wrestlers are now smaller, almost squished a little, and the wrestling ring itself looks massive. Detail has been lost on the character models, and there's been a cut in animation frames too. The audience isn't as lively either, and we're also missing Vince McMahon and Jerry Lawler sitting at the commentary table. There's also no in-game music playing at all. Now, that's all the negatives out of the way. Playing the game itself still feels a lot like the arcade, and all moves have been retained. You do need to readjust a little for the bigger ring, but it can come in handy for multi-man matches. Gameplay itself, though, is almost identical to the arcade, so the PS1 port is a good conversion. But things get a bit more interesting when putting the Sega Saturn port against the PS1 port. Graphically, there isn't too much difference. Character sprites are still a little small, for example. You can see rope shadows in the PS1 version, but not on the Saturn. The Saturn also uses dithered shadows on the characters, whereas the PS1 version doesn't. But the Saturn version does have more frames of animation for certain moves, stances, and character taunts, and the gameplay itself also feels a little more smooth. You also get McMahon and Lawler back at the commentary desk too, if that's your thing. Where the Saturn version falls quite a bit though is in its load times. The PS1 version has load times too, of course, but but they're much longer on the Sega console. The difficulty on the Saturn version has been ramped up quite a bit too, and I thought I was going nuts when certain button commands weren't registering in the game. I had a check on the Sega16.com forums, and yes, others complained about the same issue. It's a shame too, because if we were playing on real hardware, the Saturn controller would have been excellent for WrestleMania, but there's a few small things that stop it from being the definitive home release. In saying that, it's still pretty good, and you wouldn't have cared too much even after playing the PS1 release. Both games are very good home conversions, but if you have to pick one, pick the PS1 release. The PC MS-DOS version is pretty good too, by the way. It retains the in-game music missing from both the PS1 and Saturn versions. Graphically, it looks better with bigger sprites, and it plays well too. No issues here with button inputs. It doesn't seem to be as difficult as the Saturn version either. There's better balance in the PC version, with the difficulty only ramping up towards the end of the game. As far as home consoles go, I'd say you're best going with the PS1 version, but if you're happy enough playing games in front of your computer, then the PC MS-DOS version might be a better choice. But then again, why do that if you can emulate the original arcade version on your PC? The 16-bit and Sega 32X versions are definitely the most fascinating of the bunch, and it's interesting to see the compromises that were made to squeeze the arcade game onto a cartridge. If we talk strictly 16-bit, we also talk about a rare instance of the Genesis or Mega Drive version being better than its Super Nintendo counterpart, because quite simply, the Super Nintendo version is the absolute worst port of the whole lot by a wide margin. But let's look at the Sega versions first. If you're going to pick up the cartridge to play on real hardware, then it isn't that expensive, but you will need a 6-button controller. Actually, I wouldn't recommend playing the Genesis version without one. You're going to have to deal with the graphical compromises the 16-bit versions bring, and the Genesis does suffer from washed out colours. Whereas the original arcade looks vibrant and lively, the Genesis version looks a little dull. Digitized characters were never going to look as good here, and the same can be said when we look at the Mortal Kombat home ports. Not only do the characters not look as good, but animation frames have been cut down considerably, and this means things are nowhere near as smooth looking as the original. But hey, this is what we put up with back then. WrestleMania isn't the first game to get ported from the arcades in a stripped down fashion like this, and it really should come down to how well the game plays. The Genesis version actually plays really well. It's not arcade perfect in terms of gameplay, but it's surprising how well Sculptured Software did in terms of still making it feel like the arcade game. It certainly couldn't have been an easy task, because WrestleMania really doesn't play like any other game that came out before it. This is a decent alternative to the arcade that may not look like much, but almost every move's available here, and if you can get over the lack of colour, lack of clear sound, and other expected limitations a 16-bit console naturally brings, then give it a shot. But with all that being said, there is a deal breaker here for many, and that's slowdown. If there's 4 guys in the ring, the game's going to struggle, and that means the 2-player cooperative mode's going to be a bad time. Singles matches are fine, you get some slowdown in 2-on-1 matches during certain move animations, but when there's 4 guys in the ring, it's pretty bad. An upgraded Sega port was released then on the 32X add-on, the Sega Mushroom that gets ripped on daily by gamers. The 32X version was released alongside the Genesis version with a higher price tag, and what you get with this release is kinda weird. Sculptured Software didn't build the game again from the ground up. They had the opportunity to take advantage of this new hardware and try to make things even more faithful to the arcade when compared to the Genesis release, but instead they decided to take the Genesis version and upgrade it for the 32X. Now, I did just say that the Genesis version generally plays well, but that doesn't mean the developers couldn't have tried a bit more with the 32X cartridge, and it is a shame that they didn't attempt to start from scratch instead. They did fix a few issues though. They made the ring ever so slightly smaller and the sprites ever so slightly bigger. The heads-up display looks more faithful to the arcade version. They used an extended colour palette to add an extra bit of flair to the game, and while the extra colours look great on the superstars, it's really up to you if you prefer this yellow shade they used on the ring mat. Personally, I'm not a fan. The higher resolution of the game meant that the character portraits were given an upgrade, and character models are also more detailed, and the extra horsepower that the 32X brings means that there's less slowdown when 4 wrestlers are still in the ring. Keep in mind though that it's still not full speed. I've noticed online that quite a few people think the 32X version is the most difficult version of WrestleMania, and yeah, it's hard, but I found the Saturn port to be a bit more tricky. Maybe it's just me though, and it could have been the matches I played for this video, I'm not sure. But the 32X version's nowhere near as difficult as what people make it out to be. If I had to choose, I would go with the 32X port over the Genesis port though. If we're aiming for as close to the arcade version as possible, and if we want to negate slowdown as much as possible, then yeah, 32X is better than Genesis. Graphically, I could take or leave the upgrades to be honest. The 32X version also runs at a locked 30 frames per second, and I'm guessing that helped get rid of the slow gameplay in 3-on-1 and tag matches, but I do think that trade-off was worth it. Still, with all that being said, the PS1 version, in my opinion, is king of the home console releases. Others will disagree, but the disagreements I see are mostly small nitpicks that really don't affect the overall gameplay. And then we have the Super Nintendo version. My, what the fuck happened here? You can tell just by looking at this game footage that the compromises made had a real impact on the game visually, and it would be funny if it wasn't so sad. Sprites are tiny compared to the arcade release, and the ring itself is also too big. It feels a little different to play too, even though most moves have been retained. It's hard to describe, but the compromises made to the Super Nintendo release really does make it feel different from a gameplay perspective. It's almost like the character positioning and timing is all off. Stunning your opponent doesn't put them in the right spot, for example, and you expect your character and opponent to behave a certain way after a certain move, but more times than not, it doesn't happen. The slowdown is also really bad. So bad that it's a wonder that this thing got released in the first place. Just look at this 2-on-1 match. Look at this. Your job is to adjust to the slowdown in order to play the game, and if you take away the fast-paced action, the very core of what makes WrestleMania so fun to play, then there's really no point in playing it at all. This is awful. 3-on-1 matches are not available. Instead, the third guy waits outside the ring until someone gets eliminated. So they tried to stop things getting any worse, but it's already so bad that it doesn't really matter. The slow gameplay isn't limited to multi-man matches either. Take a look at this for example. What's causing the issue here is the sweat, skulls, bones and bats that fall out of the Undertaker as he gets attacked. The game just can't cope with the extra bells and whistles. And if all this wasn't bad enough, 2 characters are missing from the Super Nintendo version. That seems to be the main complaint with this port, and indeed it does take an already limited roster and it makes it even more limited. Bam Bigelow and Yokozuna are not available here, so yeah, throw it in the bin. I will say this though, the colours are way better in the Super Nintendo version in comparison to the Genesis version, and the sound is also better. Voice samples are much more clear and the chiptunes are better too. Presentation wise, it's also better, with the heads up display and menus looking more like the arcade version. But it plays awfully, it has 2 characters missing, and the lack of optimization makes this version the absolute worst of the bunch. Avoid it at all costs, and my condolences to those who owned this version back in the 90s. So after looking at all those home ports, let's take one final look at the arcade version, and you'll maybe be able to appreciate how good the original release really was. Nothing beats this. It's the fast gameplay, the combo system, how vibrant it looks, everything just makes it a really good game. And it's very possible to get the original experience at home these days with a modded arcade 1-up cabinet, or if you want to go all out, you could build your own main machine if you have the patience, money and home space. Back then though, we were stuck with the home releases and they varied in terms of quality, but not including the MS-DOS release, I'd say the PS1 version was the best, with the Saturn release coming in at a close second. I'd then pick the 32X version, the Genesis version after that, and my last choice would be the Super Nintendo port. The MS-DOS release beats all the home console ports in my opinion, but again, if you're going to go through the trouble now of using DOSBox and things like that, you might as well just emulate the arcade version. I know the same could be said for every port really, but in terms of sitting in front of a PC or laptop, you might as well just play the original arcade game. In the previous WrestleMania video I uploaded, I showed you guys the original arcade game running on my Street Fighter Arcade 1-Up cabinet. Since then, I got a few more of these things while they were on sale, and the Mortal Kombat 2 cabinet has the perfect control deck for WrestleMania. I'm not so sure if anyone else will go as far as to buy one of these mini cabinets just for WrestleMania, but I love this game so much that I plan on reskinning the whole cabinet soon, so it has the WrestleMania marquee and artwork. I'll keep you guys posted on that and maybe make a short video once I get it finished. That's going to do it then for this video, and I hope you enjoyed this one. I won't be looking at In Your House again because there's nothing more to say on that game, unfortunately, and I really don't like it as much as WrestleMania either. Give WrestleMania The Arcade Game a shot though, and please don't be put off by what others say about the game. It really feels like some people are playing the game for the first time, recording the footage and then complaining about how difficult it is, but learn a few characters and you will have fun with it. Thanks for watching guys, and take care.